Democracy means freedom of worship for all and the subordination of the rights of any one race to the overriding right of the human race. Democracy means freedom of expression and assembly and organization.
The right to freedom of expression is an important pillar for media which plays a crucial role in shaping a healthy democracy. We depend on the media for the free flow of information to allow citizens access to a wide and diverse range of opinions, analyses and perspectives, and as such it is no ordinary industry. But if unregulated, could ownership and control of the media affect the fulfillment of basic responsibilities and mandates?
So if you're a very dominant player and you don't need to worry about competition to keep your market because you're so dominant, then I think you could have a standards issue.
We can't be simplifying the notion of media as what we call media house and things like that. There's a range of networks. There's a range of ownership, which may not necessarily have anything to do with the state of Trinidad and Tobago and the boundaries here.
Because there's one company that has audience share that is somewhere between 40 and 50%. And the question is, should they be penalized for being successful?
So I've actually seen an improvement in inequality where there has been the development of a media house.
As part of its ongoing ICT series, the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago held the Open Forum seminar entitled, "Should Media Ownership Be Regulated?" This forum brought together key stakeholders and members of the general public to discuss and better understand the issues surrounding media ownership in our Twin Island state. Mr. Chris C. Charan, Chief Executive Officer at the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, outlined the provision within the current legislation to monitor media entities and the possible concentration of ownership into the hands of a few.
Another key issue for consideration in any amendment to the national broadcast policy is that of media ownership, topic today. On this issue, the existing policy states as follows. Whilst the government is firmly wedded to display of market forces in industry, the national interest demands that government be opposed to monopolistic control and abuse of dominance in this and other sectors of the economy. Existing legislation, if necessary, will either be augmented or strengthened to protect, inter alia, national security and the interests of consumer. So that is what is spelled out in the policy in respect of ownership. In the authority's view, the government has clearly defined a broad policy framework for regulation of ownership and or control in the broadcasting sector of Trinidad and Tobago. However, the rapidly evolving broadcasting environment necessitates policy adjustments in the interest of current relevance. Ladies and gentlemen, for your information, the authority commenced a consultation process on the issue of media ownership earlier this year and to date has met with representatives of the media and the Trinidad and Tobago Publishers and Broadcasting Association on the matter.
Some industry leaders argue that with the proliferation of ways to access media, is there still need for concern with regard to media ownership? Could consolidation provide citizens more volume, choice, quality, and objectivity in the news? Ms. Kiran Maharaj, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Publishers Association, reveals how consolidation actually helped weather the storm of economic downturn in the media industry.
Television revenues have been weakening. And also because of escalating expenses, it means that TV is running at a near loss. Cross-ownership allows subsidization of TV operating expenses from press and radio revenue, because if not, then there may be no more free TV. With economic challenges, we have also seen declines in ad revenue for radio. We are not living in a box, so here's the reality. Whenever revenue figures are bandied about, I kind of laugh to myself because I say they always give revenue figures for media, but they never give the bottom line figures to show that our profits may be dwindling. So In the US, online has actually helped save radio in many ways because it allows for interaction with listeners, it gives figures for numbers of visitors, and it is a value added for advertisers. So should media ownership be regulated? Out of discussions previously with TAT, these again are the answers and the issues that we would like TAT's position on. Consolidation of media. Is it a matter of monopoly versus oligopoly? Vertical and horizontal integration, state media and/or PBS to ensure pluralism, state media versus private media, foreign ownership, cross-media ownership, and the criteria for granting a license or allowing consolidation. There's a basic question. Does TAT have the authority to regulate media ownership? And this needs clarification. Do we have antitrust laws or similar laws that disallow monopolization? TTPBA would like to know TAT's position on these key issues that will affect the answer we are looking for.
Toby Mendel, Executive Director at the Center for Law and Democracy, expands on the need for early intervention and illustrates the problems of media ownership in our Latin American neighbors.
The point I think here is that we know for sure that at some point undue concentration of media ownership has seriously negative effects on freedom of expression, on democracy, on all kinds of things like, those important things. And the government, under international law, has an obligation to prevent that. And for me, the question is not what is the magic number, but do you have a number in your regulatory system so that you will avoid this situation that at some point we know is untenable. It is nearly impossible to deconstruct a media monopoly after it exists. I think there are very, very few countries which, having let the situation go so far that they're facing a highly concentrated media environment, have managed to deconstruct that. I know that there are battles raging on all across Latin America, sort of to the south of you, in Mexico, in Brazil, in Ecuador, in Argentina. There are wild and wonderful claims of government oppression and freedom of expression, and some wild and wonderful and ridiculous things that governments are trying to do as well. Ecuador, Venezuela, your neighbor, is a good example of that. In these countries, there are highly concentrated media markets, particularly in television broadcasting. Those players are political guerrillas, if you will, and it's very, very problematical, and it's almost impossible to deconstruct them. You don't have that situation now in Trinidad and Tobago, so I would encourage the government of Trinidad to act now, to act in ways. Kiran made a number of business arguments. Those are very valid arguments, and certainly measures should not be put in place which threaten the business viability of the media here. You don't want to, in the name of protecting the consumer or the citizen, really undermine freedom of expression and media viability here. But certainly you don't want to end up with an unduly concentrated media market. And so I think sort of appropriate discussions with stakeholders should be undertaken, and to come to that the proper number, a number that works for Trinidad, which may not be the magic number, but which will be a functional number. Thank you.
When we discuss a topic like this, I think one of the thoughts is that we need to protect the country from the conglomerate, and therefore it's the idea of big business. But in fact, there's another dimension to Trinidad and Tobago, because right now there are 9 licensed TV stations, but 3 of them are owned by the state, which arguably, if one had that as your prescribed rules that apply in some other countries, would not be allowed.
Public service broadcasting is a very, very important part of the diversity of the broadcasting environment, and contributes very importantly to that environment. So I and UNESCO and most of the actors, freedom of expression actors around the world, would be opposed to these ideas, for example, of privatizing the public broadcaster. But on the other hand, as I understand it, and I haven't actually studied that issue very closely, but I understand that your state broadcasters are not fully independent, and therefore, and of course the lack of independence, if that's correct, lack of independence of these bodies completely undermines their ability, or significantly undermines their ability to contribute to diversity, because if they're being influenced by the government, then that's the opposite of diversity. They're saying what one player in the system wants to be said. So I think that's something that should be done then. When it comes to the commercial side of things, the market and these guys, what you find globally is, one is the BBC approach, where the public broadcaster is entirely funded through public funding, doesn't carry any advertising, and is not in the market in that sense. Of course, it's in the market in terms of audience, competing for audience share and justifying its existence and justifying the public subsidy it gets through market share and all of that sort of thing, but it's not competing for the advertising market because it doesn't advertise. The much more common situation is that in Canada, where you have both a public subsidy and some access to the advertising market. And then you get examples like, as I understand is the case here, where the public broadcaster essentially derives all of its income from advertising. I think that is a very unfortunate model, because you're creating a public broadcaster and you're saying, give the public something that the commercial players don't give them, and the commercial players don't give it to them because it costs too much to be effective. It's not cost effective to produce that programming, and yet do that on a market model. That's not a realistic thing to ask of it. You want special, good quality, extra value public broadcasting, you have to pay for it.
One of my concerns is that you can have standards dropping or falling with plethora of different, so that the market has to be controlled.
I disagree with that, because what we have been seeing, because we have it here, is that as media houses expand, the quality has actually improved because of the synergies that have developed in the operational of the entity. We've been able to put better training in place for other things, develop new platforms, new distribution channels, have hire better staff, train staff, that kind of thing. So I've actually seen an improvement in the quality where there has been the development of a media house.
How do you expect that to proceed? We have evidence in the country, for example, and I would just identify three, of a different approach taken to how to develop media. And I give the example of Tobago, which is a small NGO that came out of certain robust days, but has developed very well in terms of another model of building community into it.
As you know, and because we have teenagers, we know, they spend a lot more time on things like iPods and iPads, and that is how they are getting information on the internet. That is how they get information. We have students in our country who have laptops, and that is how they access information. So the question that we are facing, or that we are asking, is who is going to regulate that? Because at the end of the day, these are not, and I'm going to speak, very much on the table, these are not stupid people we're talking to anymore. I have a discussion with my 13-year-old, and I swear he's 18. And it's not because the manner of what he says, in so much as how informed he is. And that is something that we must consider in our current landscape. And when we talk about ownership, newspaper does come in media. But really, who is regulating the newspaper? What happens there? So here you have new media, and now you have online newspapers, online radio, online television. It is getting cheaper and cheaper every day. You could go to a coffee place or a pizza place and have Wi-Fi, and that is how people are consuming media. Who is going to regulate that? And the truth is, when people realize that is how they can get possibly more accurate information, that is how they can be citizen journalists, that is how they can engage and empower, then that is where they will turn, and that is a threat that is facing us. So we need to look at that.
We've come to the close of a very insightful discussion on media ownership concentration. The discussion was rich, and I'm absolutely certain the information shared by both of our presenters and participants will continue to guide how media ownership framework are set in Trinidad and Tobago in the future.